The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Sweetwater Creek, Montana, as Rebecca Morgan clutched her children close, trembling at the news that her husband would never return. The year was 1876, and death had come calling for the third time in her young life. First her parents to fever, then her brother to war, and now Tom to a bandit's bullet. Standing on the porch of their modest homestead, Rebecca surveyed the vast emptiness stretching before her, wondering how she would raise two small children alone in this unforgiving territory. "Mama, when is Papa coming home?" 5-year-old Sarah asked, her blue eyes wide with innocence. Rebecca swallowed hard, her throat tight with unshed tears. "Remember what we talked about, sweetheart. Papa has gone to heaven." 3-year-old James clung to her skirts, too young to fully comprehend the tragedy that had befallen their family. Rebecca stroked his dark curls, so like his father's, and fought back a fresh wave of grief. The ranch needed tending, the cattle needed feeding, and winter was approaching fast. With no money for hired help and the nearest neighbor 10 miles away, Rebecca knew her options were dwindling faster than the daylight. Sheriff Douglas would be back tomorrow with Tom's personal effects, but Rebecca already knew there would be little of value. Their savings had gone toward the new barn, still half built at the edge of their property. Tom had promised to finish it before the first snow. "I'll manage," she whispered to herself, though the words rang hollow in the gathering dusk. As she ushered the children inside for a simple supper, Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching from the shadowed tree line. She hurriedly locked the door behind them, clutching Tom's old rifle close as night descended upon Sweetwater Creek. Elijah Wade adjusted his worn Stetson against the setting sun, his tired eyes fixed on the small homestead in the distance. His horse, Dusty, shifted beneath him, eager to finish their long journey. 6 months on the trail had left both man and beast weary to the bone, but Elijah had made a promise and he intended to keep it. "Just a little farther, boy," he murmured, patting Dusty's neck. "Then we can both rest." The letter from Tom Morgan had reached him in Colorado 3 weeks ago, but by the time Elijah had arrived in Sweetwater Creek, he'd learned his old friend was already dead and buried, shot by bandits while defending a stagecoach carrying the town's payroll. Tom had been working as an occasional guard to earn extra money for his family, a family Elijah had never met but felt responsible for nonetheless. "I'm coming, Tom," he whispered to the wind. "I'll keep my word." The promise had been made years ago when they were both young cowboys riding for the Diamond G outfit. If anything happened to either of them, the other would look after what was left behind. Elijah never imagined he'd have to fulfill that vow, especially not with a widow and 2 small children depending on him. As the homestead grew closer, Elijah noticed the half-finished barn and the state of disrepair beginning to show on the property. 3 months without a man's hands had taken its toll. He hesitated at the edge of the property, suddenly unsure of his reception. How could he explain to a grieving widow that her husband's old friend had come to help? Would she even want his assistance? Before he could debate further, a small figure darted from the house toward the chicken coop. A little girl with blonde braids flying behind her, carrying a pail nearly as big as she was. Something protective stirred in Elijah's chest at the sight of the child struggling with her chore as darkness approached. Nudging Dusty forward, he made his decision. He would introduce himself properly and offer his help. If the widow Morgan wanted him gone afterward, he would respect her wishes, but he had to try. As he approached, the little girl spotted him and froze, dropping her pail with a clatter. Her wide eyes reminded him so much of Tom that Elijah felt a sharp pang of grief. "Hello there," he called softly, keeping his hands visible as he dismounted. "You must be Sarah." The child backed away, her fear evident. "Mama," she cried, turning to run back to the house. Before Elijah could explain himself, the front door flew open, and a woman emerged with a rifle trained squarely at his chest. Her auburn hair escaped from a hasty bun, framing a face that might have been pretty if not contorted with fear and determination. "State your business and then move on," she demanded, her voice steady despite the slight tremble in her hands. Elijah raised his palms slowly. Madam, I'm Elijah Wade. I was a friend of Tom's. We rode together for the Diamond G some years back. The rifle didn't waver. Tom never mentioned an Elijah Wade. He wrote to me about 3 weeks ago, Elijah explained, reaching slowly toward his saddlebag. May I show you his letter? After a tense moment, the woman nodded once. Elijah carefully extracted the folded paper and held it out. The little girl had retreated behind her mother's skirts, joined now by a small boy with dark curls who peered curiously at the stranger. Rebecca Morgan kept the rifle raised with one hand while taking the letter with the other. Her eyes scanned the familiar handwriting, and Elijah saw the exact moment recognition dawned. He did mention writing to an old friend, she admitted, lowering the rifle slightly. But that was before. I know, madam, I'm deeply sorry for your loss. Tom was a good man. Rebecca studied him carefully, suspicion still evident in her green eyes. What do you want, Mr. Wade? Tom asked for my help with the ranch, with finishing the barn before winter, Elijah explained, gesturing toward the half-built structure. I'd like to honor that request if you'll allow it. We don't need charity, Rebecca replied stiffly, though her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. It's not charity, Mrs. Morgan. It's a debt I owe your husband. Elijah removed his hat, holding it respectfully against his chest. We made a pact years ago to look after whatever the other left behind if something happened. I'm just keeping my word. Rebecca's composure faltered slightly. We're managing fine. A chicken squawked nearby and little Sarah whispered, But Mama, the chickens need feeding and you said the roof has a hole and Sarah. Rebecca hushed her gently before turning back to Elijah. Mr. Wade, I appreciate your sentiment, but I cannot pay you for your labor. I'm not asking for payment, Elijah said. Just a corner of the barn to lay my bedroll once it's finished. I've been on the trail a long while and could use a place to winter before deciding where to head next. Rebecca hesitated, clearly weighing her pride against practical necessity. The children stared up at Elijah with curious eyes, Tom's eyes, and he felt his resolve strengthen. 1 week, she finally said. You can stay 1 week, help with the most pressing repairs, and then we'll reassess. Elijah nodded, replacing his hat. That's fair, madam. I'll make camp by the creek tonight and start on the barn at first light. Nonsense, Rebecca said, surprising him. There's an old cot in the lean-to behind the house. You can sleep there. No sense in you catching your death before you've been of any use. It wasn't the warmest welcome, but Elijah recognized the practical nature of a woman raised in the West. He nodded his thanks, leading Dusty toward the lean-to as Rebecca ushered her children back inside. As darkness fell completely over Sweetwater Creek, Elijah made his simple camp and stared at the stars above. Well, Tom, he whispered, I'm here. Now what? Dawn broke over Sweetwater Creek in ribbons of gold and crimson, finding Elijah already at work on the barn. He'd risen before first light, determined to prove his worth to the skeptical widow. The foundation and frame were solid. Tom had done good work, but the roof and western wall remained unfinished, leaving the structure vulnerable to the coming winter winds. Rebecca emerged from the house with the children in tow, surprise evident on her face at finding him already hard at work. Good morning, Mrs. Morgan, Elijah called, tipping his hat. I hope I didn't wake you with the hammering. We rise early here, she replied, her tone slightly less guarded than the previous evening. The children and I have chores before breakfast. Little James broke free from his mother's grip and ran toward Elijah, fascination written across his small face. Are you fixing Papa's barn? He asked, his voice high and sweet. Elijah crouched to the boy's level. Yes, sir, I am. Your pa started a fine barn and I'm just helping finish what he began. James nodded solemnly. Papa said I could help when I got bigger. Something twisted in Elijah's chest. Well, you look plenty big to me. How about you hand me those small nails when I need them? The boy's face lit up and he looked to his mother for permission. Rebecca hesitated only briefly before nodding. Just for a few minutes, James. Then you need to help Sarah with the chickens. As Rebecca moved toward the chicken coop with Sarah, Elijah set James up with a small box of nails, showing him which ones to hand over. The boy's eagerness to help was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. This should have been Tom's moment with his son. Mama says Papa's in heaven, James said suddenly, his small fingers sorting through the nails. Do you think he can see his barn from there? Elijah swallowed hard. I reckon he can see everything from heaven, especially his fine family. James seemed satisfied with this answer and continued his task with renewed purpose. By mid-morning, Rebecca brought out a pitcher of water and some cornbread. It's not much, she said, setting it on a stump near the barn. It's more than welcome, Elijah replied, wiping sweat from his brow. He'd made good progress on the western wall, and with another day's work, he could start on the roof. Rebecca watched him for a moment. The children seem to have taken to you. They're good kids. Tom would be proud. A shadow crossed her face. Yes, he would. She hesitated, then asked, How long did you know my husband? Nearly 10 years, Elijah replied, pouring himself some water. We met working cattle for the Diamond G when we were barely more than boys. Rode together for 3 seasons before Tom decided to settle down. When he met me, Rebecca said softly, Elijah nodded. He wrote me about you, said he'd found the most beautiful, stubborn woman in Montana territory and wasn't letting you get away. A ghost of a smile touched Rebecca's lips. He was the stubborn one. She glanced toward the unfinished barn. He insisted on building this himself, said hired help would cut corners. Tom always did things proper, Elijah agreed, never took shortcuts with anything that mattered. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. Mr. Wade, I appreciate your help, truly. But I need to be clear, we won't be your responsibility once the barn is finished. The children and I will manage. Elijah recognized the fierce independence in her stance. It was the same determination he'd seen in countless frontier women who refused to be broken by the harsh realities of Western life. I understand, Mrs. Morgan. I'm just honoring a promise to an old friend. She nodded, seemingly satisfied, and returned to the house. Elijah watched her go, noting the straight line of her back despite the weight she carried. Tom had chosen well when he'd fallen for Rebecca. She had the kind of strength that the West demanded of its women. The day passed in a rhythm of work and brief interactions. The children returned periodically to check on his progress, with Sarah gradually warming to his presence. By sundown, Elijah had completed the western wall and prepared the wood for beginning the roof the next day. As he washed up at the well, Rebecca appeared with a plate of beans and salt pork. Join us for supper, she said, more statement than invitation. The children have been asking. Inside the small but tidy house, Elijah removed his hat and sat where directed at the worn wooden table. The meal was simple but filling, with Sarah and James providing most of the conversation, peppering Elijah with questions about his travels and adventures. Did you fight Indians? Sarah asked, her eyes wide. Sarah, Rebecca admonished, that's not appropriate dinner conversation. Actually, Elijah said gently, I've traded with many native people during my travels. They've shared their food and knowledge with me more times than I can count. Are they scary? James whispered. People can be scary when you don't understand them, Elijah explained. But mostly, folks just want to protect their families and live in peace, no matter where they come from. Rebecca watched this exchange with thoughtful eyes, and Elijah sensed her assessment of his character continuing. After the children were tucked into bed, Rebecca poured 2 cups of coffee and motioned for Elijah to join her on the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the vast Montana sky. You're good with them, she said after a while. The children. Elijah cradled the warm cup in his calloused hands. They make it easy, they're smart kids. They miss their father terribly, Rebecca said softly. Especially James, he started having nightmares. That's hard, Elijah replied, unsure what comfort he could offer. Rebecca sighed, her profile illuminated by the soft glow from the window. I thought we'd have more time, you know. Tom was so careful, so responsible. I never imagined he'd die defending a stagecoach. He died helping others, Elijah said. That was Tom all over. Always putting everyone else first. Rebecca nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek before she quickly brushed it away. The sheriff said he saved 3 lives that day. That should bring me comfort, I suppose. Grief doesn't always listen to reason, Elijah observed quietly. Rebecca looked at him then, really looked at him, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. No, it doesn't, she set her empty cup aside. Thank you for your work today, Mr. Wade. The barn already looks more like what Tom envisioned. Call me Elijah, please, and it's the least I can do. Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. Good night, Elijah. As she disappeared inside, Elijah remained on the porch, watching the night sky and feeling the weight of his promise to Tom growing heavier with each passing moment. The Morgan family needed more than just a finished barn. They needed security, stability, and healing. Elijah wasn't sure he could provide any of those things, but he was certain of one thing. He wouldn't be leaving when the barn was finished, not until he was sure they would be all right. Days passed in a rhythm of work and tentative connection. Elijah's 1 week stretched into 2 as the barn took shape, and other repairs around the homestead demanded attention. The broken wheel on the wagon, the leaky roof over the kitchen, the fence posts that had rotted through all were fixed under Elijah's capable hands. Rebecca's initial wariness gradually softened into cautious gratitude as she witnessed his dedication. The children were less reserved in their acceptance. Sarah followed Elijah around the property, peppering him with questions about his travels and adventures. James appointed himself Elijah's official helper, his small face serious as he handed over tools and nails. You've got quite a crew there, Rebecca commented one afternoon as she brought him water. Elijah was repairing the porch steps while the children sorted his tools with exaggerated importance. Best help I've ever had, Elijah replied with a smile, accepting the dipper of water. Sarah's got a sharp mind, notices everything. And James, well, he's going to be a fine builder someday. Rebecca's expression softened as she watched her children. They've changed since you arrived. There's more laughter now. Children are resilient, Elijah said. They take their cues from the adults around them. Are you saying I don't laugh enough, Mr. Wade? There was a challenge in her voice, but her eyes held a glimmer of humor. Elijah raised his hands in mock surrender. I wouldn't dare suggest such a thing, Mrs. Morgan. A small smile curved her lips, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, revealing dimples and lighting her green eyes with warmth. Elijah found himself momentarily speechless. The moment was broken by the distant sound of approaching horses. Rebecca shaded her eyes, her smile fading as she spotted 3 riders approaching from the direction of town. That's Sheriff Douglas, she said, her body tensing. I wonder what brings him out this way. Elijah set aside his tools and stood beside her as the riders drew closer. The sheriff was accompanied by 2 men Elijah didn't recognize, though their fine clothes and city posture marked them as outsiders. Mrs. Morgan, Sheriff Douglas called as they reined in their horses. His eyes narrowed slightly at the sight of Elijah. Wade, Sheriff, Rebecca acknowledged. What brings you all the way out here? The sheriff removed his hat, revealing thinning gray hair. Mrs. Morgan, these gentlemen are from the Montana Land Company. They've asked me to accompany them to discuss some business with you. The taller of the 2 strangers dismounted, his expensive boots raising dust as he approached. Mrs. Morgan, my name is Howard Sinclair. This is my associate, Mr. Patterson. We represent interests that are very eager to purchase your property. Rebecca's spine stiffened. My property isn't for sale, Mr. Sinclair. Sinclair's smile didn't reach his eyes. I understand your attachment to your home, Mrs. Morgan, but I'm prepared to offer a very generous sum, more than enough for you to relocate to town and provide a comfortable future for your children. As I said, we're not interested in selling, Rebecca repeated firmly. Sinclair exchanged a glance with his companion. Perhaps you should consider the offer carefully. A woman alone with 2 small children. The winter will be harsh. There are many dangers out here for a family without protection. The implied threat hung in the air. Elijah stepped forward, his hand casually resting near his holstered revolver. Mrs. Morgan isn't alone, he said quietly, and she's already given you her answer. Sinclair's eyes flicked to Elijah, assessing. And you are, Elijah Wade, family friend. Sheriff Douglas cleared his throat uncomfortably. Now, Wade, these men have a legal right to make an offer. No harm in that. No harm in making an offer, Elijah agreed, but there seems to be harm implied if the offer is refused. Sinclair's pleasant facade hardened. I assure you, no threat was intended. We merely want Mrs. Morgan to understand the realities of her situation. I understand my situation perfectly well, Rebecca interjected. This land belongs to my children. It's their inheritance from their father, and it's not for sale at any price. Sinclair replaced his hat, his smile tight. Very well, but our offer remains open should you reconsider. The winter is approaching and circumstances can change quickly. He handed Rebecca a folded paper. Our terms should you change your mind. As the three men rode away, Rebecca's hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the paper. Her eyes widened at the figure written there. That's a substantial amount, she admitted quietly. Elijah watched the retreating riders with narrowed eyes. Why are they so interested in your land? Rebecca folded the paper and tucked it into her apron pocket. I don't know. We have good water rights with the creek, but so do other properties in the area. Something doesn't feel right, Elijah mused. Those weren't the actions of men simply making a business offer. Rebecca gazed out at her property, the half-finished barn, the small garden, the grazing land stretching toward the distant mountains. This was Tom's dream, she said softly. He loved this land, said our children would grow up with room to breathe and a legacy to build on. Elijah nodded, understanding the weight of that dream. Then we'll make sure they have that chance. Rebecca looked at him, surprise evident in her expression. I'm not leaving until I know you and the children are secure, Elijah said simply. That means figuring out why those men want your land badly enough to make veiled threats. You don't have to involve yourself in our troubles, Rebecca protested, though her voice lacked conviction. Elijah met her gaze steadily. I already am involved, Rebecca. And I don't abandon folks I care about. The words hung between them, charged with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Rebecca's cheeks flushed slightly as she turned away. The children need their supper, she said, and you should finish those steps before dark. As she hurried inside, Elijah returned to his work, his mind turning over the encounter with Sinclair. Something was happening in Sweetwater Creek, and he intended to find out what it was before it threatened the family he was growing increasingly determined to protect. The next morning, Elijah rode into town with a list of supplies needed to complete the barn. The small settlement of Sweetwater Creek consisted of a single dusty street lined with a general store, saloon, blacksmith, and a handful of other establishments necessary for frontier life. As he tied Dusty to the hitching post outside the general store, Elijah noticed several unfamiliar men loitering near the saloon, their city clothes and watchful eyes marking them as outsiders. Inside the store, Elijah greeted the proprietor, an older man with spectacles perched on his nose. Morning, Mr. Fletcher. Need a few things for the Morgan place. Fletcher's eyebrows rose slightly. You're still out there helping the widow, eh? Good of you, Wade. Tom would appreciate it. As Fletcher gathered the items on Elijah's list, a heavyset man with a thick mustache approached. You're staying at the Morgan homestead? He asked without preamble. Elijah assessed the stranger cautiously. I am, friend of the family. The man extended his hand. Name's Russell Barnes. I own the spread north of the Morgans. His handshake was firm, his gaze direct. Mind if we talk outside? Once on the boardwalk, Barnes got straight to the point. Those men who visited yesterday, they've been making the rounds. Several homesteaders have already sold out. Any idea why they're so interested in the land around here? Elijah asked. Barnes glanced around before lowering his voice. Rumors of a railroad spur coming through. If it happens, land values will triple overnight. And the Morgans' property, right in the proposed path. Barnes shook his head. The widow doesn't know it, but her land might be the most valuable in the county if those rumors prove true. Elijah's jaw tightened. Sinclair threatened her, implied she and the children might not be safe if she didn't sell. Barnes wasn't surprised. They started with offers, moved to threats when folks hesitated. My neighbor Wilkins found his cattle poisoned last week after he refused to sell. Have you reported this to Sheriff Douglas? A bitter laugh escaped Barnes. Douglas is in their pocket. Notice how he escorted them to the Morgan place, giving them an air of legitimacy. Elijah processed this information, his concern deepening. I appreciate the warning, Barnes. The rancher nodded. Tom Morgan was a good man, helped me drive off rustlers last spring, just returning the favor. He hesitated, then added, Be careful, Wade. These aren't men who take no for an answer. With his supplies loaded and this new information weighing heavily on his mind, Elijah headed back to the homestead. The autumn air carried a bite that promised an early winter, and he pushed Dusty to a faster pace, eager to return before dark. As the Morgan property came into view, Elijah noticed smoke rising from the chimney and the warm glow of lamplight from the windows. Something shifted in his chest at the sight, a feeling suspiciously like coming home. He pushed the thought aside, reminding himself that his presence here was temporary, a fulfillment of a promise to a friend. Rebecca met him at the barn, helping unload the supplies. "You were gone longer than expected," she said, her tone casual though Elijah detected concern beneath it. "Had an interesting conversation with Russell Barnes," Elijah replied, explaining what he'd learned about the railroad and the land purchases. Rebecca's face paled. "So this isn't just about our water rights or grazing land. No, it's about speculation and greed," Elijah confirmed. "If Barnes is right, Sinclair is trying to buy up land cheap before news of the railroad becomes public." "What should we do?" Rebecca asked, unconsciously stepping closer to him. "For now, we stay alert," Elijah said. "I'll finish the barn and make sure the house is secure for winter." "No sense making any decisions until we know more." Rebecca nodded, then surprised him by touching his arm lightly. "Thank you, Elijah, for looking out for us." The simple touch and the trust in her eyes affected him more than he cared to admit. "It's what Tom would have wanted," he said, though he knew his motives had grown beyond a promise to his friend. That evening, after the children were asleep, Rebecca and Elijah sat at the kitchen table, studying a crude map of the surrounding properties that Elijah had drawn based on Barnes' information. "If the railroad does come through as rumored," Elijah explained, tracing a line across the paper, "your property would be the natural junction point. The creek provides water for the steam engines, and the flat area near your eastern boundary would be perfect for a station." Rebecca studied the map thoughtfully. "So if we sell, Sinclair's company makes a fortune when the railroad arrives. If we don't sell, they'll try to force you out," Elijah finished grimly. Rebecca's green eyes met his, determination hardening her delicate features. "Then we don't sell and we don't get forced out." Elijah couldn't help the smile that spread across his face. "I was hoping you'd say that." The days that followed settled into a new rhythm. Elijah worked tirelessly to complete the barn and secure the property, always with an eye toward potential threats. Rebecca's initial reservations about his presence had given way to quiet appreciation and growing trust. The children had fully embraced him, with James declaring proudly to anyone who would listen that Mr. Elijah is fixing everything Papa couldn't finish. One crisp afternoon, as Elijah was setting the last of the roof beams on the barn, he spotted Rebecca in the garden, harvesting the last of the season's vegetables. Her auburn hair gleamed in the sunlight, escaped tendrils framing her face as she worked. She'd lost some of the haunted look that had shadowed her eyes when he first arrived, and Elijah found himself watching her more often than he should. "She's pretty, isn't she?" Sarah's voice startled him from his thoughts. Elijah looked down to find the little girl watching him with knowing eyes far too perceptive for her young age. "Your mama is a handsome woman," he agreed carefully. Sarah nodded solemnly. "Papa used to watch her like that too. He said she was the prettiest lady in all of Montana Territory." Elijah cleared his throat, embarrassed at being caught staring. "Your pa was a wise man." "Do you like us, Mr. Elijah?" Sarah asked suddenly. The question caught him off guard. "Of course I do, Sarah. You and James are fine children." "No, I mean, do you like us? Like family?" Her blue eyes were earnest, hopeful in a way that tugged at his heart. Elijah set down his hammer, giving the child his full attention. "I care about you and your brother and your mama very much, more than I expected to." Sarah seemed to consider this answer carefully before nodding. "Good. Because we like you too. James says you tell better stories than Papa, but I told him that's not true. Nobody told stories better than Papa." "Your Papa was the best storyteller I knew," Elijah agreed, his throat tight with emotion. "I could never match him there." "But you're good at fixing things," Sarah continued thoughtfully. "And you make Mama smile sometimes. She didn't smile at all before you came. Before Elijah could respond to this observation, Rebecca called Sarah to help bring in the vegetables. The little girl scampered off, leaving Elijah with thoughts he wasn't ready to examine too closely. That evening, a sudden autumn storm blew in from the mountains, bringing driving rain and fierce winds that rattled the windows of the small house. The children were already asleep when the worst of it hit, but Rebecca and Elijah sat by the fire, listening to the howling gale outside. "I'm glad you finished the roof on the barn today," Rebecca said, her hands busy with mending. "The animals will be dry at least." Elijah nodded, whittling a small wooden horse for James. The timing worked out well. That new roof should hold against anything this storm throws at it. A particularly strong gust shook the house, and Rebecca glanced toward the children's room. "I hope they sleep through it." "James is frightened of storms. Takes after his mother there," Elijah asked with a slight smile. Rebecca looked surprised, then shook her head ruefully. "Is it that obvious? I've never liked storms, even as a child. My father used to say I turned white as a sheet at the first rumble of thunder." "Your secret's safe with me," Elijah assured her, "though I've always found storms rather peaceful myself." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Peaceful, with all that chaos?" "There's something honest about a storm," Elijah explained. "It doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is. No deception, just raw power, and when it passes, everything is washed clean." Rebecca considered this perspective. "I never thought of it that way." A tremendous crack of thunder shook the house, and Rebecca jumped, her mending falling to the floor. Elijah moved to retrieve it, his hand brushing hers as they both reached for the fallen fabric. The brief touch sent an unexpected warmth through him, and when he looked up, Rebecca's face was mere inches from his own. Her eyes widened slightly, her lips parting in surprise. For a breathless moment, neither moved. The spell was broken by a small cry from the children's room. Rebecca pulled away quickly, standing as James appeared in the doorway, his small face streaked with tears. "Mama, the thunder is scary," he whimpered. Rebecca gathered him into her arms. "It's all right, sweetheart. The thunder can't hurt you, it's just making noise." "But it's angry," James insisted, burying his face against her neck. Elijah approached them slowly. "You know, James, my father told me that thunder is just the sound of the sky giants bowling up in the clouds." James peeked at him with one eye. "Bowling? That's right," Elijah continued, warming to his tale. "They set up their pins and roll their big heavy balls, and when they knock the pins down, boom, that's the thunder we hear." "What about the lightning?" James asked, his fear momentarily forgotten. "That's when one of the giants makes a really good shot," Elijah explained seriously. "They get so excited they light up the whole sky to celebrate." James considered this explanation, his brow furrowed in thought. "Are they mad at us?" "Not at all," Elijah assured him. "They're just having fun playing their game. They don't even know we can hear them down here." The boy's face relaxed slightly. "So they're not scary." "Well, they're very loud," Elijah admitted, "but not scary once you know what they're doing." Rebecca watched this exchange with a soft expression Elijah couldn't quite interpret. "I think Mr. Elijah's explanation makes much more sense than being afraid, don't you?" she asked her son. James nodded slowly. "Can I sleep in your bed tonight, Mama, just in case the giants bowl too loud?" Rebecca smiled. "Just for tonight." She looked at Elijah over James's head. "Thank you," she mouthed silently. Elijah nodded, watching as she carried James to her room. The brief moment they'd shared by the fire lingered in his mind, along with the realization that his feelings for Rebecca Morgan had grown far beyond his original promise to Tom. As the storm raged outside, Elijah faced a storm of his own making inside his heart. He had come to Sweetwater Creek to fulfill a debt to a friend, but somewhere along the way, that duty had transformed into something deeper, something that felt dangerously like love. 2 days after the storm, Elijah rode into town again, determined to gather more information about Sinclair and the Montana Land Company. The rain had left the roads muddy, but the skies were clear and bright as he approached Sweetwater Creek. The town seemed unusually busy for a weekday morning, with several unfamiliar horses tied outside the saloon. As Elijah dismounted in front of the general store, he noticed a crowd gathered near the sheriff's office. Among them stood Howard Sinclair, engaged in animated conversation with Sheriff Douglas and several townspeople. Elijah entered the store, where Fletcher was arranging a display of canned goods. "Morning, Fletcher. What's all the commotion about?" The storekeeper glanced toward the window. "Big news, Wade. The railroad's coming to Sweetwater Creek, official announcement just yesterday. They're saying it'll put our little town on the map, bring prosperity to everyone." "Everyone?" Elijah questioned, his suspicion growing. Fletcher lowered his voice. "Well, those who planned ahead anyway. Sinclair and his company bought up nearly half the surrounding properties in the last month. They'll make a fortune when construction starts in the spring. And the properties they haven't acquired yet," Fletcher shrugged. "Prices will go up now that the news is public. Smart folks who held out might get better deals." He hesitated, then added, "Course, there's talk that the railroad might just use eminent domain for any holdouts. Government can force sales for public good, you know." Elijah's jaw tightened. "Is that legal?" "Legal enough with the right paperwork and the right officials in your pocket," Fletcher replied, his expression suggesting he didn't entirely approve. "Heard Sinclair boasting that he'll own every inch of land along the proposed route by Christmas, one way or another." As Elijah collected the supplies he needed, his mind raced with the implications of this news. Rebecca needed to know immediately. If Sinclair was planning to use legal means to force her off her land, they needed to prepare. He was about to leave when Barnes entered the store, his expression grim. "Wade, glad I caught you. Have you heard about the railroad?" "Just now," Barnes nodded, motioning Elijah to follow him outside where they couldn't be overheard. "There's more. Sinclair's men paid a visit to the Wilkins place last night, burned their barn to the ground, said it was a warning." Elijah's blood ran cold. "Anyone hurt?" "No, thank God, but Wilkins signed over his deed this morning." Barnes looked troubled. "They're not playing games anymore, Wade. With the railroad announcement, they've dropped all pretense." "I need to get back to the Morgans," Elijah said, already moving toward Dusty. Barnes caught his arm. "You can't protect them alone, Wade. Sinclair has at least a dozen men working for him now." "What are you suggesting?" "A meeting tonight at my place. Several of us who haven't sold yet are gathering to discuss our options. Bring the widow Morgan if you can. We need to present a united front." Elijah agreed to the meeting and mounted quickly, pushing Dusty to a gallop as soon as they cleared the town limits. The mud splattered his clothes as they raced back to the homestead, his worry growing with each mile. As the Morgan property came into view, Elijah's heart nearly stopped. 3 riders were approaching the house from the opposite direction. Even at a distance, he recognized Sinclair's distinctive hat. "Hiya," he urged Dusty faster, cutting across the pasture to intercept the visitors before they reached the house. Rebecca was hanging laundry in the yard, the children playing nearby, when she spotted the approaching riders. Her hands froze on the wet sheet she was pinning to the line, her body tensing as she recognized Sinclair. "Sarah, James, inside now," she commanded quietly, her tone brooking no argument. The children, sensing her fear, immediately obeyed, scurrying into the house. Rebecca straightened her apron and lifted her chin, determined to face these men with dignity despite the fear churning in her stomach. She had just stepped forward when she heard hoofbeats approaching rapidly from the west. Turning, she saw Elijah riding hard toward the house, his face set in grim determination. Relief flooded through her as he reached her side, dismounting in a fluid motion to stand beside her as Sinclair and his men reined in their horses. "Mrs. Morgan," Sinclair greeted her, his smile not reaching his cold eyes. "I trust you've heard the wonderful news about the railroad." "I've heard rumors," Rebecca replied cautiously. "Not rumors anymore," Sinclair declared triumphantly. "Official announcement yesterday. Sweetwater Creek is about to become the most important junction between Helena and the Eastern Territories." Elijah stepped slightly forward, his posture protective. "Congratulations on your foresight, Sinclair. Must be nice having inside information before the general public." Sinclair's smile tightened. "Just good business sense, Wade, something you drifters wouldn't understand." "What do you want, Mr. Sinclair?" Rebecca interrupted, her patience wearing thin. Sinclair dismounted, approaching with an envelope in his hand. "In light of the announcement, I'm authorized to increase our previous offer by 50%. He extended the envelope. A more than generous sum, I think you'll agree. Rebecca made no move to take it. My answer hasn't changed. This land is not for sale. Frustration flashed across Sinclair's face before he controlled his expression. Mrs. Morgan, I understand your emotional attachment to this property, but you must think practically. This is an opportunity to secure your children's future. Their future is right here, Rebecca replied firmly. On the land their father worked to build for them. Sinclair's pleasant facade cracked slightly. The railroad is coming through here whether you like it or not. If you don't sell willingly, there are other methods to acquire the necessary land. Are you threatening eminent domain? Elijah asked bluntly. The government has certain powers when it comes to projects benefiting the public good, Sinclair replied smoothly. Though such proceedings can be messy, contested valuations often result in much lower compensation than what I'm offering today. Or perhaps you're planning something less legal, Elijah suggested, his hand resting near his holstered revolver. Like what happened at the Wilkins place last night, Sinclair's eyes narrowed. Tragic accident, that fire. Old barns can be so susceptible to lightning strikes, even days after a storm. The thinly veiled threat hung in the air between them. Rebecca moved closer to Elijah, her hand brushing his arm in a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Sinclair. I see you found protection, Mrs. Morgan, Sinclair observed, his gaze calculating as it moved between them. Though I wonder how long a drifter like Wade will stick around once things get difficult. That's not your concern, Rebecca replied coldly. Sinclair replaced his hat. Very well. My offer remains open until the end of the week. After that, he shrugged eloquently. Well, the future becomes less certain. As the three men rode away, Rebecca's composure crumbled slightly, her hands trembling. They burned the Wilkins barn, she whispered. Elijah nodded grimly. No one was hurt, but Wilkins sold this morning. Barnes says Sinclair is determined to own everything along the railroad route by Christmas. Rebecca pressed a hand to her mouth. What are we going to do? First, we're going to a meeting tonight at the Barnes Ranch. Other landowners who haven't sold yet are gathering to discuss options. Elijah placed his hands gently on her shoulders. Rebecca, I won't let them drive you from your home, I promise you that. She looked up at him, vulnerability and strength warring in her expression. Why, Elijah? Why risk yourself for us? Your promise to Tom has been more than fulfilled. Elijah held her gaze, knowing he could no longer hide behind his original motivation. Because somewhere along the way, you and the children became important to me, more important than I expected. He hesitated, then added softly, more important than anything. Rebecca's eyes widened at his confession. Before she could respond, Sarah called from the doorway, asking if the men were gone. The moment broken, they stepped apart, though something had shifted between them, something that couldn't be undone. As evening approached, Elijah hitched the wagon while Rebecca prepared the children to accompany them to the Barnes Ranch. The meeting was risky, but leaving them alone at the homestead seemed even more dangerous after Sinclair's thinly veiled threats. The journey to the Barnes property took nearly an hour, with darkness falling as they arrived. Several wagons and horses were already gathered in the yard of the substantial ranch house, indicating that many of the remaining independent landowners had heeded Barnes' call. Inside, the spacious front room was filled with concerned faces, farmers, ranchers, and homesteaders from throughout the Sweetwater Creek area. Barnes greeted them warmly, making a special effort to welcome Rebecca and introduce her to those she didn't know. Mrs. Morgan, I believe you know Martha Wilson, Barnes said, guiding her toward a gray-haired woman who immediately took charge of Sarah and James, leading them to a back room where other children were playing under the watchful eye of Barnes' wife. With the children settled, the meeting began in earnest. Barnes outlined what they knew about Sinclair and the Montana Land Company, a consortium of Eastern investors using local agents to acquire land ahead of the railroad announcement. They've already bought out 17 properties, Barnes reported grimly. Some willingly sold, others were coerced through various means. What about the sheriff? Someone asked. Can't he stop these strong-arm tactics? A bitter laugh rose from several attendees. Douglas is in Sinclair's pocket, a weather-beaten rancher named Hollister explained. Has been since they arrived, turns a blind eye to everything they do. What about the territorial governor? Rebecca suggested. Surely he wouldn't condone such methods. Barnes shook his head. The governor's office is in Helena, a week's ride from here. By the time any complaint reached him and action was taken, it might be too late for many of us. So what options do we have? Elijah asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. I see 3 possibilities, Barnes replied. First, we can sell on Sinclair's terms and walk away with something, even if it's less than fair value. Mutters of disagreement filled the room. Second, Barnes continued, we can hold out individually and hope to negotiate better terms once the railroad begins construction in the spring. And risk having our barns burned down in the meantime, Hollister interjected bitterly. Or third, Barnes concluded, we band together, pool our resources, and protect each other. Make it clear to Sinclair that intimidating one of us means dealing with all of us. This last option provoked the most discussion, with opinions divided on whether collective action would be effective against Sinclair's well-funded operation. We'd need to organize patrols, Elijah suggested. Ensure no property is left undefended, especially at night. That means men away from their own work during the day, a farmer pointed out. Winter preparations would suffer. Better delayed work than burned homes, Rebecca countered, her quiet voice carrying unexpected authority. The room fell silent as she stood. My husband died protecting what was right. I won't dishonor his memory by surrendering to threats and intimidation. Her words galvanized the group. After further discussion, a plan emerged. The landowners would form rotating patrols, ensuring each property had protection during vulnerable hours. They would also send a delegation to Helena with documentation of Sinclair's tactics, hoping to secure intervention from the territorial government. As the meeting concluded, Barnes pulled Elijah aside. Wade, I want you on the delegation to Helena. You're articulate and you've seen firsthand what Sinclair is capable of. Elijah hesitated, glancing at Rebecca, who was collecting the now sleepy children. I can't leave them unprotected. Barnes followed his gaze, understanding dawning in his eyes. The widow Morgan means a great deal to you, doesn't she? More than I have a right to, Elijah admitted quietly. Barnes clapped him on the shoulder. Tom Morgan was my friend too. He'd want his family cared for and happy. Don't let misplaced guilt stand in the way of whatever's growing between you. As they rode home through the darkness, the children asleep in the back of the wagon, Rebecca broke the comfortable silence. You should go to Helena with the delegation, Elijah. He looked at her in surprise. You heard that, she nodded, her profile illuminated by moonlight. You'd be the most effective spokesman for our cause. You have a way with words that the others lack. I won't leave you and the children vulnerable, Elijah said firmly. Rebecca's hand found his in the darkness. We wouldn't be unprotected. The patrol schedule Barnes proposed would ensure someone is always nearby. She hesitated, then added softly, besides, you can't stay forever, can you? The question pierced him more deeply than he expected. Is that what you want? For me to leave once this is resolved? Rebecca's fingers tightened around his. No, she whispered. That's what I'm afraid of. The admission hung between them, filled with possibilities neither had dared voice until now. Elijah guided the horses to the side of the trail, stopping the wagon beneath a stand of pines. In the silver moonlight, Rebecca's face was both vulnerable and determined as she turned toward him. Tom was my whole world, she said softly. When he died, I thought that part of my life was over forever. I never imagined I could feel. She trailed off, unable to find the words. Rebecca, Elijah began, his voice rough with emotion. I came here to fulfill a promise to an old friend. I never intended, never expected, I know, she interrupted gently. Neither did I, and it feels like a betrayal somehow to care for someone else so soon after losing him. Elijah reached up, hesitantly brushing a strand of hair from her face. Tom loved you too much to want you to be alone. He would want you to be happy, to have someone to share your burdens. Tears glistened in Rebecca's eyes. The children adore you, especially James. He needs a man in his life, someone to look up to. They're remarkable children, Elijah said. A credit to their parents. Rebecca's gaze dropped to his lips, then back to his eyes. I'm afraid, Elijah, not of what I feel, but of losing someone else I care for. I couldn't bear it again. I can't promise that nothing will happen to me, Elijah replied honestly. No one can make that promise, but I can promise that as long as I draw breath, I'll be there for you and the children. In the quiet stillness of the night, with the sleeping children just feet away, Rebecca leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief, tender, filled with both hesitation and hope. When she pulled away, Elijah saw in her eyes the same tumult of emotions that stormed within his own heart: grief for what was lost, fear of what might never be, and the fragile beginnings of something new and precious. "We should get home," Rebecca whispered, her cheeks flushed. "It's getting late." Elijah nodded, too moved to speak as he urged the horses forward again. The rest of the journey passed in companionable silence, both of them aware that something fundamental had changed between them, something that could never be undone. As they approached the homestead, a flicker of light in the distance caught Elijah's attention. At first, he thought it might be a lantern left burning, but as they drew closer, the flickering grew more intense and a sense of dread filled him. "Rebecca," he said urgently, "something's wrong." She followed his gaze, a gasp escaping her as she realized what she was seeing. The barn, the newly completed barn that Elijah had labored over for weeks, was engulfed in flames that reached hungrily toward the night sky. "No." Rebecca cried, clutching at Elijah's arm as he snapped the reins, urging the horses to a dangerous speed over the rutted trail. They pulled into the yard to find the barn fully ablaze, the heat intense even from a distance. The animals, thankfully, were in the pasture for the night, but the structure itself was beyond saving. "Stay here with the children," Elijah commanded, leaping from the wagon and racing toward the well to draw water. It was a futile effort. Even with Rebecca joining him, despite his protests, they could do little more than prevent the fire from spreading to the nearby outbuildings. By dawn, all that remained of the barn was a smoldering skeleton of charred timber and ash. As the first light of day illuminated the destruction, Rebecca stood beside Elijah, her face streaked with soot and tears. "This is my fault," she whispered. "If I had just sold to Sinclair—" "No," Elijah interrupted firmly. "This is Sinclair's doing, not yours. He's trying to break your spirit, make you feel helpless." The children, awakened by the commotion, stood wide-eyed at the sight of the ruined barn. James's small face crumpled. "Papa's barn is gone," he sobbed. Rebecca gathered him into her arms. "We'll build another one, sweetheart. An even better one." "Will Papa help from heaven?" the boy asked through his tears. Rebecca looked helplessly at Elijah, her own grief threatening to overwhelm her. Elijah crouched beside them, placing a gentle hand on James's shoulder. "Your papa would be very proud of how brave you're being right now," he said softly. "And yes, I think he'll help us build a new barn, not with his hands but with his spirit watching over us." James considered this explanation, his tears slowing. "Will you help too, Mr. Elijah?" The simple question contained more meaning than the child could know. Elijah looked to Rebecca, seeking permission for what he was about to promise. She nodded slightly, her eyes filled with a complex mixture of emotions. "Yes, James," Elijah said firmly. "I'll help build a new barn. And I'll help with whatever else you and your mama and sister need, I promise." "Because you're our friend?" Sarah asked, joining them. Elijah's gaze returned to Rebecca. "Because I care about you all very much, because your home has become important to me too." Rebecca's hand found his, their fingers intertwining in silent understanding. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Later that morning, as Rebecca prepared breakfast, Elijah made a decision. "I need to ride to town," he said quietly, so the children couldn't overhear. "This can't go unanswered." Rebecca's face paled. "What are you planning to do?" "Nothing foolish," he assured her. "But Sinclair needs to understand that his tactics won't work, that burning our barn has only strengthened our resolve." "Our barn," Rebecca repeated softly, noting his choice of words. Elijah hadn't realized what he'd said until she pointed it out. "Rebecca, she placed a finger against his lips. "Be careful, Elijah. The children and I need you to come back." The simple statement contained a world of meaning. Elijah caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I will, I promise." The ride to town was tense, Elijah's mind racing with what he would say to Sinclair. As he approached Sweetwater Creek, he noticed an unusual level of activity: wagons being loaded, people gathering in small groups along the main street. He reined in beside the general store, where Fletcher was watching the commotion with obvious concern. "What's happening?" Elijah asked. Fletcher grimaced. "News from Helena. The territorial governor sent a telegram last night. Seems someone's been investigating the Montana Land Company for months. They're not affiliated with the railroad at all. The whole thing's been a land grab based on false information." Elijah's jaw dropped. "The railroad isn't coming." "Oh, it's coming," Fletcher clarified. "But the route was decided months ago. It's passing 20 miles south of here. Sinclair and his bunch knew that all along. They've been buying worthless land from folks based on lies." Anger surged through Elijah. "Where's Sinclair now?" Fletcher nodded toward the saloon. "In there with his men, trying to figure out how to cut their losses. Sheriff Douglas just resigned. Seems he was on their payroll and doesn't want to face charges." Elijah dismounted, striding purposefully toward the saloon. Inside, he found Sinclair and several of his associates huddled around a table, speaking in urgent tones. The conversation ceased abruptly when Elijah entered. "Wade," Sinclair acknowledged warily, noting Elijah's thunderous expression. "I suppose you've heard about your fraud." "Yes." Elijah approached the table slowly, every muscle tense with controlled fury. "You burned our barn last night." Sinclair's eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't insult my intelligence," Elijah replied coldly. "You tried to intimidate Mrs. Morgan into selling, just like you did with Wilkins and others." "Prove it," one of Sinclair's men challenged. Elijah ignored him, his focus solely on Sinclair. "You're going to make this right." A humorless laugh escaped Sinclair. "Or what? The law around here has been in my pocket." "Even with Douglas gone, you have no evidence." "I don't need evidence," Elijah said quietly. "What I have is the testimony of 20 landowners who'll swear to your threats. I have the proof of your fraudulent claims about the railroad route, and I have this." He placed a folded paper on the table, the offer Sinclair had made to Rebecca. "This document proves you were attempting to purchase land under false pretenses," Elijah continued. "The territorial governor would be very interested in this evidence of fraud." Sinclair's confident facade cracked slightly. "What do you want, Wade?" "Reparations," Elijah stated firmly. "You'll pay for the rebuilding of the Morgan barn, plus compensation for the stress and fear you've caused. You'll do the same for anyone else whose property was damaged during your campaign of intimidation." "And if I refuse?" Sinclair's hand moved subtly toward his jacket pocket. In a flash, Elijah's revolver was in his hand, cocked and aimed steadily at Sinclair's chest. "Then I'll take great pleasure in escorting you to Helena myself to face charges. I hear the territorial prison is particularly unpleasant this time of year." The standoff lasted several tense seconds before Sinclair's shoulders slumped in defeat. "Fine, I'll pay for damages. But then we're done. My company pulls out of Sweetwater Creek, and we never speak of this again." "One more condition," Elijah added. "You'll sign a document admitting your deception, to be held by a neutral third party. If you ever return to this area or attempt retaliation of any kind, that document goes to the authorities." Sinclair's face twisted with rage, but he recognized his position was untenable. "Agreed." By mid-afternoon, Elijah had secured not only Sinclair's written agreement, but also a substantial payment for the rebuilding of the barn and additional compensation for the Morgan family. Similar arrangements were made for the other affected landowners, with Barnes supervising the proceedings to ensure fairness. As Sinclair and his men rode out of Sweetwater Creek, presumably never to return, a sense of relief washed over the community. The threat that had hung over them for months was finally gone. Elijah rode home with the news and the funds, his heart lighter than it had been in years. As the Morgan homestead came into view, he saw Rebecca and the children in the yard, watching anxiously for his return. He dismounted before Dusty had fully stopped, striding toward them with purpose. Rebecca rushed to meet him, her eyes searching his face for news. "It's over," he announced, pulling her into an embrace that lifted her off her feet. "Sinclair's gone and he won't be back." Rebecca's arms wrapped around his neck as he set her down. What happened? Elijah explained everything: the fraud, the confrontation, the reparations. We have enough money to rebuild the barn and then some, he concluded. And the whole town knows what Sinclair tried to do. No one will ever try to take your land again. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears of relief. You did it, she whispered. You saved our home. We saved it, Elijah corrected gently, all of us together. The children had been listening intently, and now James tugged at Elijah's sleeve. Does this mean you'll stay and help build the new barn? He asked hopefully. Elijah looked to Rebecca, his heart in his eyes. That depends on your mama, he said softly. Rebecca took a deep breath, seeming to come to a decision. Children, why don't you go check on the chickens? I need to talk to Mr. Elijah alone for a moment. Once the children had scampered off, Rebecca took Elijah's hands in hers. When Tom died, I thought my life was over, she began quietly. I couldn't imagine feeling happiness again or love. I certainly never expected to find those feelings with the stranger who showed up on my doorstep claiming to be Tom's friend. Elijah's heart pounded as he waited for her to continue. The children need you, Rebecca said. I need you. Not just to build a barn or protect our land, but to be part of our lives, part of our family. Her voice faltered slightly. If that's what you want too. Elijah cupped her face gently in his hands. Rebecca Morgan, I came here to fulfill a promise to an old friend. I stayed because I couldn't bear to leave. Somewhere along the way, you and those children became my whole world. He took a shaky breath. I love you, I love them, and nothing would make me happier than to be part of this family. Rebecca's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. Then stay, she whispered. Stay and help me raise these children. Stay and grow old with me on this land. Their lips met in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, tender, passionate, and filled with hope. When they finally parted, Elijah rested his forehead against hers, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought him to this moment. A small voice interrupted their reverie. Mama, is Mr. Elijah going to be our new papa? They turned to find Sarah watching them, her expression serious but hopeful. James stood beside her, thumb in his mouth, waiting for an answer. Rebecca looked to Elijah, her eyes asking a silent question. He nodded, then knelt before the children. If that would be all right with you, he said gently. I would be honored to be your papa. Not to replace the wonderful father you had, but to love you and care for you alongside your mama. Sarah considered this carefully. Would you teach me to ride a horse? Papa said he would when I got bigger. I would be happy to, Elijah promised. James approached shyly. Would you tell me stories and help me build things like Papa did? Elijah's throat tightened with emotion. Every day if you'd like, the boy's face brightened. And would you make Mama smile? She smiles more when you're here. I'll do my very best, Elijah vowed, his voice rough with unshed tears. James nodded solemnly, then threw his small arms around Elijah's neck. Then I think you should be our papa. Sarah joined the embrace, and Rebecca knelt beside them, completing the circle. As Elijah held them all close, he made a silent promise to Tom Morgan that he would cherish and protect this precious family they now shared. I'll be the dad they've been waiting for, he whispered, tears glistening in his eyes. I swear it. 3 months later, on a crisp winter morning with snow blanketing the Montana landscape, Elijah Wade stood beside Rebecca Morgan before a small gathering of friends and neighbors in the newly completed barn. The structure was larger and sturdier than its predecessor, built with love and determination by Elijah and the men of Sweetwater Creek, who had banded together after Sinclair's departure. Pastor Williams from town smiled benevolently as he pronounced the words that would unite Elijah and Rebecca in marriage. Sarah, in a pretty blue dress sewn by Martha Wilson, held a small bouquet of dried flowers. James stood proudly beside Elijah, the wooden box containing the wedding rings clutched carefully in his small hands. Do you, Elijah Wade, take Rebecca Morgan to be your lawfully wedded wife? Pastor Williams asked. Elijah gazed at the woman before him, more beautiful than ever in her simple ivory dress, her auburn hair adorned with a single white ribbon. I do, he replied, his voice steady and sure. And do you, Rebecca Morgan, take Elijah Wade to be your lawfully wedded husband? Rebecca's green eyes shone with happy tears. "I do," she answered, squeezing his hands. When it came time for the rings, James stepped forward importantly. As Elijah took Rebecca's ring from the box, the boy tugged at his sleeve. "Now you're really our papa," he whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Laughter rippled through the assembled guests, and Elijah felt his heart might burst with joy. "Yes, son," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Now and forever." As he slipped the simple gold band onto Rebecca's finger, Elijah made one more silent promise to Tom, to Rebecca, to the children, and to himself. This family that had found each other through loss and hardship would know only love and protection as long as he drew breath. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Elijah gathered Rebecca into his arms for a kiss that sealed their union amid cheers and applause. Sarah and James pressed close, and Elijah knelt to include them in the embrace, knowing that this moment marked not just the union of a man and woman, but the creation of a family bound by choice and love. Later, as their friends celebrated with a feast spread across tables in the new barn, Elijah found a moment alone with Rebecca near the doorway. Outside, snow fell gently from a pearl-gray sky, transforming Sweetwater Creek into a winter wonderland. "Happy, Mrs. Wade?" he asked softly, his arm around her waist. Rebecca leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "More than I ever thought possible again," she admitted. "You've given us so much, Elijah, not just security or protection, but joy. You've given me a home," he replied simply. "Something I never truly had before." From inside came the sound of children's laughter as Barnes' son showed James and Sarah a trick with a spinning top. Rebecca smiled at the sound. "They adore you," she said. "Especially James. He follows you everywhere, trying to walk like you, talk like you." "He reminds me so much of Tom sometimes," Elijah admitted. "Has that same determined look when he's concentrating." Rebecca nodded. "I see Tom in both of them. But now I see you in them too, in the way Sarah stands up straighter when you compliment her, in how James faces his fears because you've shown him how." Elijah pulled her closer. "I never thought I'd have children of my own. Now I have two amazing ones who have accepted me into their hearts." "And perhaps more someday," Rebecca suggested, a hint of mischief in her eyes. Elijah's heart skipped a beat at the implication. "I would like that very much," he replied, bending to kiss her tenderly. Their moment was interrupted by tiny boots crunching on snow as James came searching for them. "Papa Elijah, Mama, Mr. Barnes is going to play his fiddle and everyone's going to dance." Elijah scooped the boy up into his arms. "Well, we can't miss that, can we, partner?" As they returned to the celebration, Elijah Wade reflected on the journey that had brought him to Sweetwater Creek. He had arrived a solitary drifter, honor-bound to fulfill a promise to a departed friend. He would leave this day a husband, a father, a man with roots and purpose. The barn that had been destroyed in an act of malice had risen again as a symbol of community and perseverance. The family that had been broken by tragedy had been made whole again through love and choice. As Barnes struck up a lively tune and Elijah led Rebecca into a dance, surrounded by their children and neighbors, he sent one last thought to his old friend. "Rest easy, Tom. I'll be the father they need, the husband Rebecca deserves. Your family is my family now, and I'll protect them with everything I have." In the years that followed, the Wade family flourished on their Sweetwater Creek homestead. The railroad eventually did come through Montana territory, though many miles south, as predicted. Sweetwater Creek remained a small but vibrant community, its residents bound together by the shared experience of standing firm against those who would have taken their land through deception and intimidation. Elijah and Rebecca welcomed a son of their own the following winter, a strong boy they named Thomas, in honor of the man whose friendship had brought them together. As the children grew, so too did the homestead, with additional rooms added to the house and more land cultivated each year. Sarah became an accomplished horsewoman under Elijah's patient tutelage, eventually managing much of the ranch's expanding cattle operation. James developed his father's skill with tools, apprenticing with the town carpenter before returning to build furniture that became sought after throughout the territory. And little Thomas, with his mother's green eyes and his father's quiet determination, grew up hearing the story of how his family had been forged not once, but twice through courage, sacrifice, and love that transcended even death. On warm summer evenings, Rebecca would often find Elijah on the porch, watching their children play in the yard that had once seemed so empty and forlorn. She would slip her hand into his, and together they would marvel at the life they had built from the ashes of loss. Tom would be proud, she would sometimes say, able now to speak of her first husband with fond remembrance rather than sharp grief, and Elijah would nod, squeezing her hand gently. "I like to think he guided me here," he would reply, "to the family I didn't know I was searching for." In this way, love found its way to Sweetwater Creek not as a replacement for what was lost, but as a new chapter in a story of resilience, hope, and the enduring power of promises kept.